Hello, and welcome to the first installment of our R training videos. This is the first video where we are detailing actual R code and how to use this code in order to access data in VectorSurv. So in this section, we're going to demonstrate how to connect to various data sets within VectorSurv using our R package known as vectorsurvR. We're going to go over how to access data with account credentials. And we encourage people to follow along as we do this. We will have a, I will be sharing my screen and I will be showing you, I will be live coding along with you. And we do encourage you guys to follow along and back up and return to the videos whenever necessary. Before we dive into the actual code, we need to make sure that you guys have R installed and RStudio installed. These are essential prerequisites for using the package. And if you have not yet done that, please see our first video. To get started, we're going to open our RStudio, and RStudio should appear like this. This is your RStudio session. Right here, currently, there's no project or file open in this session, and we are going to, for the purpose of this training, we are going to create an RMarkdown file, and then we're going to go over different functions within VectorSurvR package. And so to create an RMarkdown file, you go to File, New File, and you click on RMarkdown, and we would like to title this Training 1. And so this will create a new RMarkdown document. Notice that even though it has a title here, it is not actually saved anywhere on your computer at this time. You will want to save this and rename it, ideally to a, save it to a folder that you would like to access and keep all these trainings in. That is how we're going to be doing this. And this will allow us that anytime we will write data in R or do anything that will save information in R, it will save to this home repository. So here, I'm going to create this markdown file. And so now this will live in my folder known as my R trainings. You will notice that this markdown file here has a lot of text in it, and this is not text that we placed here. This is text that is present with every R markdown file, and the one that you open as well should contain the same exact text. And one of the great things about markdown files is that they are renderable. So as you can see here, we allow this to be rendered into an HTML document. These can also be rendered into Word documents or PDFs. In future trainings, we will be detailing how to render actual reports using our VectorSurvR package and things that we might create within our Markdown. But for the time being, just for demonstration purposes and to make sure everybody's program is running appropriately, we recommend that you go here and see it says knit. When you click knit, this should render this file into an HTML document. And of course, this is code that R has provided, and this is more of their introductory code. But so you click knit, and once it's saved, you'll see it will render. And this is a very simple file. That's pretty much, if you do not get this, there might be something incorrect with your R version. And we encourage you to go back into the first video of the series and look over and make sure that you have an up-to-date version of R and everything is properly installed. So now, given that all of this information here is not from us, we will delete all this and start with this blank file. This first chunk right here is more of a global options. We don't have to worry about this right now. We might be getting more into that sort of thing later. For now, just leave this as is. And we are going to start the actual coding portion of the training. Now, if you followed along with the first video, you will have already installed the VectorSurvR package into your system. If you have not, please go ahead and do that now. I will go and do that as well. And one thing to note is that you would like to do this through the console because you do not necessarily want to run and reinstall the package every time that you knit or run the R markdown file. And so to install our package, you install packages, and it is case sensitive. If everything goes correctly, you will see here that it was appropriately unpacked. And from there, we can get into the actual code on the Markdown file. And so one of the things we want to do is in Markdown is that we have the opportunity here to create these chunks of code. And so a way to quick create a chunk is to Control-Alt-I or Command-Alt-I if you were using Mac, I believe. And so I will create a new chunk where you can appropriately run code. And the first thing you want to do is load the libraries we will be using. In this training, we will only be using the VectorSurvR package. And so you want to this is something you would like to have in all of your Markdown files when you are ever going to be using the VectorSurvR, because this tells R that those who load this package to load this information and to use it in the subsequent chunks of code. And so to run this in Markdown, you can use Control-Enter, and that runs a single line. To run an entire chunk, you can do Control-Shift-Enter, which in this case, because it's one line of code, it does not affect it. So once you have loaded loaded our package in R, you'll have access to all the functions within that package. And we're going to start off with how to get an official token, an access token or a bearer token using your own agency or account credentials. In this case, we will be using our account credentials. I will be using a training account. And we encourage you guys to use your own username and password for the gateway. The first step to getting your data would be to obtain your user token. And so to do that, the function in question now is the getToken function. And I want to point out that any point, as you can see here, getToken, as you can see here, when we access it, it's telling us right now that it comes from the VectorSurvR package. And so this is the appropriate function to use. And this function is going to prompt for user credentials. And then from there, it will return a token that we can then use to obtain data. It will also return information on what data the user is allowed to access. Now in R, and this is an important step for understanding R documentation, and just a very, very helpful thing about R is that if ever you have an official function such as getToken here, or you wish to know more about the documentation, you can run getToken with a question mark in front of it, or run any function. And when you run this and you Control-Enter, you will find that in your console, not your console, but over here in this help window will pop up. And this will give you a brief description of the function and how it is used. And so, and an example of how we would recommend using it. And so this is very helpful for many reasons in R, and this can be done with any function in R, and this will pull up the in-code documentation. And so we do recommend you guys, if ever you are confused or wondering if perhaps the parameters or something is not right with a function, to first run this to be able to look at the documentation. How we would actually use this, as you can see down here in this example, is it is recommended to assign token to getToken. And so right now we are going to get the returned output of getToken will get stored in this token variable. And so when we run getToken, you should get a prompt here that prompts for your gateway username and password. And upon running that, you should get a printout from getToken that tells you what agencies you have access to. For this training, we have access to SAP YOLO. You should see either a name of your own agency or any other agencies you do have access to. And the information necessary to access your data is stored in this token variable. And so it's important to note that the token does expire. These tokens last about 1 hour. They expire for security reasons. And you do want to have this this portion at the beginning of your markdown file and then reference the token variable later in your other functions, as opposed to calling get token every time you wish to obtain data. Now that we have our token loaded from our get token function, we can start actually accessing our data. And so the first function we are going to go over, and so again, I'm going to create another chunk with Control-Alt-I, and we are going to go into the get RFRO collections function. And before we actually use it, I'm going to run the help section just so you guys can see the documentation of it while we go over. And so this is the get RFRO collections function. It allows you to obtain collections data from VectorSurv. And this collections data here means tick collections and mosquito collections from VectorSurv with your valid token. And that is a token that is from the get token function. So now this function also does allow you, if you have access to multiple agencies, to filter on the agency's ID. However, most people will not be needing to use agency filter on agency ID. And this sort of parameter, it does not need to be, it is defaulted to null. So it can be ignored if you do have one agency. It is recommended that you ignore that. However, if you do have multiple agencies or an aggregate and you wish to not necessarily sift through or filter out your data, it can be very helpful if you just want to pull out a specific agency's data. And so to use get RFRO collections here, as you can see, even though this question mark, this is really just nothing in this function to appropriately run it. How I would recommend using it, as you can see down here, we have a little example portion here, is that you first want to get your token, and then you want to run the code appropriately. And so how I would do this here would be collections. And one thing to note in R is that if you are ever in this situation where you have a function with parameters, you can press tab and the parameters associated with the function should pop up. And so that could be very helpful. So see, we have a parameter for token. And so it will know it's a token if it's the first parameter, but you can say token if you wish. And then we can say, okay, we want to start year 2020. And then we want to end year 2021. And we would like data for mosquitoes. So just write mosquito. And if we had multiple agencies, we do have the option here, agency ID. This is null, and for most people, this is not necessary. However, again, if we had 50 agencies and we just wanted what's in Sakiolo, we here would just put an agency ID equals 55. And so once this has been written out, you run this again with Control, Enter, and it might take a second depending on how much data you have, but this will store the output data frame into this collections variable. And now that we have this data, the first thing I would like to show you guys is that we just want to look at the data itself. So if you were to type in collections as this variable and then press Control, Enter, you should get a data frame that shows up. And this is containing all the collections data that we have requested for the years of interest. And in future videos, we will be going over how to properly process, modify, summarize this data in a way that is useful to users. We would like to note that you can just as easily get your tick data from here. If we were to say ticks, or just change mosquito here to tick, it would return the data of your tick collections. Something just important for coding in general is to make sure that your naming conventions are consistent. So here I just said collections. I didn't specify it was mosquito collections. So I would want to do, if I would, sometimes it's better to specify the variable appropriately. So say like I really wanted to specify it 2020, or even mosquitoes, and that sort of way. And that would just more maybe help organize it a bit, but that is also up to the user. and how they would like to go about that. So we also have a get pools function, which functions almost identically to the get RFO collections function, and it allows users to access their pools data for both mosquitoes and ticks. So you can see here, get pools, run that just to see the general documentation and some recommended ways of using it. And then if you wish to get your pools data, we can create another variable known as pools, and then we can specify information about it if we wish. I'm just going to specify that it's from years 2020 to 2021, and then it's mosquitoes. This is just for my own referencing purposes. This can be done in many different ways. So here, this runs almost identically to get RFO collections. So token equals our token. And again, we can press tab to see all the available parameters. Finally, we can specify that we want data from our mosquitoes. And then we can run this, and this will access our pool data. So once that has run, similar to how we did with our collections data, we're just put this in the chunk and control enter. You should get a data frame of your pools data. So say you access data using these functions, and now you wish to keep them in a Excel sheet, or you wish to access them some other way. I'm going to be taking the mosquitoes collections here, and we are going to be storing it in a CSV file. And so to do that, we're going to be using the function. This is not a function that we have written. It is an R-based function. Let's write CSV. And so I'm going to real quickly just do the same thing I've done with all the other functions so far, which is show us the quick documentation. I think this is very useful just to understand what these functions are. And as you can see, there's a lot going into this function, of course. For our purposes, we don't have to get this complicated. But this is just if you wish to, if you're curious or you really want to understand a bit more, it does give you the information necessary. So if we wanted to write the CSV, one thing we should know is that we want to know where we are appropriately saving our data. This should be in the folder of that you have saved this RMarkdown file. To ensure that you don't accidentally save your data into, or CSV file into the random abyss of the computer, it is a good idea first to check your session. It's up here in RMarkdown, you go session. And if you look down to set working directory, and this is just a precaution, you want to set to source file location, and this will just ensure that your working directory here, this essentially will ensure that anything that you save now into this file is going to be written into the folder that this file lives. And that will just help a lot with any sort of confusion. And sometimes the worst thing that can happen is you save something and it's on a random document folder somewhere and you have no idea where it is. And it can get, and then in the future, if you wish to access that data, even your R program won't know where that data is. And so to write the CSV, I'm going to write here, I'm going to and I know here on this side, this sort of documentation can look quite scary and complicated. It doesn't have to be, and essentially when you write a CSV here, X, see this portion X is the object of interest, and then the file name of interest will come after it. So here I am going to write the mosquitoes 2021 data frame into a Excel file or CSV. And so I want to tell it that this is the data I'm interested in writing it to. And then I want to give my file a name. And I'm going to call it Mosque 2021. And a very important thing not to skip is that we have to specify this as a .csv. If we don't put this, even though it is a write CSV, it will not write it as a CSV. It will be quite confused. And then here, obviously there's a lot of different options These are not necessary right now. Those are things that on your own time, or if you had interest, you can look into, and there are multiple ways of encoding files and writing things. And that is not something we're getting into here. We are just going to show you that now that we have appropriately told it which data we want to write to the file and the name of the file, we control enter. All right, let's see. We see, looks like we have an issue. It says not found. So let me go up here. Not found. So let me rerun this. So in case anything like that ever does happen, you can rerun to re-get your data. Okay, so the reason why just to clarify, the reason why it says not found is because, as you can see earlier, I rewrote the name of this data without actually running it to store it back in this. Remember, previously I had stored this as collections, and then I said, oh, we should really be more specific and write this as mosquito collections. But I had not run the function again. So as a result, it did not know what this was. And so now that I reassigned it and I reran the function, it now knows that this is, look at it, this is the appropriate table. And so those are all these like little things in coding that are good to keep an eye on, especially if you're beginning and just knowing like what is being stored where. And it can really happen anytime. So now that this file, this object does exist, and we have this appropriate sort of write or not file here, now we can press Control Enter, and this is going to write the CSV and write CSV. All right, so that ran. You can see that we have a CSV file saved in the R training working with our directory of interest. You can also see that we have a knitted HTML document, which is from when we previously knit the document earlier in this video. And so here, click on this, you will see that you have a CSV download of this data. Important to know that Excel files do sometimes have data limits. R can handle much larger data frames than Excel can. So if you had a couple, say, million things of information, you might not be able to appropriately write that to Excel. You might have to break that up or find another way. So it is important that whenever you do write something to Excel, if you get a warning message or when you open Excel and it says not everything's here, just keep that in mind, because that doesn't mean that all the data was not loaded. Sometimes the Excel file in question doesn't have the capacity to store as many rows. However, this should not be an issue for most people. But as you can see here, this is a saved CSV file on our computer. And from there, if we were to go back into our RStudio, even if we were to delete all of our data in our environment so that any of these collections, all these things are, I was to go here. So here in R, I just want to point this out. All the data that you write or save gets stored up in this data section in these important variables. And so this is just a way that R keeps this information. So like once you have a CSV saved, you can then read that CSV as well in another file. You can do that in R, you can do that in another program as well. And so I'll show you guys real quickly how to then, if I wanted to access this data, and this could be done, again, like in another R script, it could be done anywhere. It does not necessarily have to be attached to this directory as long as you correctly tell it where this data is. And so if we wanted to, because we sit in the R folder currently, the R trainings folder, you can read that data back in. And so similar to write CSV, read CSV functions a similar way. And again, like I always recommend looking at the function documentation just to get a better idea of how R is handling it. So you can see here, we're using this function. So we would do read CSV. And sometimes in R, if you're in the right, you can press tab. And it will, in quotations, and it will bring up a list of all the files in your folder. And so we want to read this previously written. And I want to say header equals true. And that way it's just telling it that we want, I mean, that's already in the default of the function, as you can see here. And this might seem a bit counterintuitive to write the data and then reread the data back in. However, this is now a data frame directly from what we have just written into the CSV 2 steps prior. So this has nothing to do with what came directly out of the other function. It is simply a copy of the data that we wrote previously. And how and why this is important is because it allows you to avoid the step of having to re-download your data or connect to the API for your data every single time. Sometimes, especially if you have historical data or data from 5 years ago that you know that you're not changing, that doesn't have any modern change, you might not want to have to wait potentially, the 5 minutes or so, depending on how much data you have, for it to load every single time you run a report. Sometimes it's easier just to have that stored separately and then access that stored data. It, however, does not allow you to get real-time data. So if you were very interested in getting up-to-date 2024 data that's coming into your VectorSurv, you would want to rerun the get article collections every time. And for our next video, we will be going over more information on how to appropriately wrangle your data, but specifically your VectorSurv data in R. And when I say that, I'm referring to ways of changing column names, ways of subsetting, filtering, selecting certain columns, and or summarizing and grouping data so that you can get more information out of what you have. As well, beyond that video, we will be going into ways of graphing, we will be going into calculations and charting, and creating tables of informative tables surrounding your own personalized VectorSurv data. And we hope to see you guys in future videos. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. And thank you very much.